Well, good afternoon again. Uh, Glad to have you with us today. Can you hear me okay?
It's on.
All right. I'm just a slight bit taller than Dr. Do, but I'm glad that you are here again to share in the second of two sessions with Dr. Richard Do. He shared last week a little bit about he and his wife Jean's experience with grief and a bit of that story and some of the ways that they were able to find that helped them to process it, to adjust to it, and learn a new way of life. This today's session, Dr. Do will certainly share some of that. Will be a little bit more about what do you do to help other people who are experiencing grief. What are some ways that you can do that? And there'll actually be a little take-home thing here for you where you can take that on your way out to help remind you. And then finally, where is God in the midst of all of this? Is just often a question that we ask ourselves, and I know I have fielded that question more than one occasion. Where is God in the midst of all of this? In fact, the sages have been asking that question for thousands of years. I'd like to welcome Dr. Do together to us today, but before I do, let me offer a word of prayer and then join me in welcoming Richard Do back. God, we're grateful for your presence among us. We are grateful for your work. God, we know that there are many graces that you have, and not least of which is the ability to come together, to lean on one another, to share life and experience, to share wisdom and understanding. God, we thank you for the gifts that you have given on this day, for bright sunshine and cool breezes, and for words of wisdom shared by a friend. God, bless us. Bless Dr. Do as he speaks to us. And in Christ's name, be with us all. Amen. Would you join me in welcoming Richard Do?
I'm glad to see you came back. Last week, we talked about several ways in which we can help ourselves, but what happens when somebody else incurs the loss? What do we do then? What can we do when a family member or friend, acquaintance, or colleague, when they get mired down in this morass of grief? What can we do to help them? For a lot of people, this is unexplored territory, and it's a place we just feel uncomfortable even when we've been there before. The list of, what can we do? What should we do? What should we not do? What should we say and what should we not say? The list of things that are hurtful to people are relatively short. The list of things that are said that are hurtful are voluminous. That's the one thing we hear more about in Compassionate Friends is the things people say and do that are hurtful. To make it kind of simple, probably the one thing you don't say is stay away from platitudes and stuff like that. That's not really helpful. And probably the best 2 or 3 things you can say is just, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for your loss. And then cut it off. You get much further than that, and you start getting into quicksand, and that's not a good thing to do. The one that I found that seems to people tend to respond to is, I can't imagine how you must feel. And this is the one I tell doctors to do all the time, because they always are trying to tell them how to feel, and they really foul up. But when you say this, I can't imagine how you must feel. What that says is, I don't know how you feel, but I'm trying as hard as I can. And so those are 2 things you can say. I have some handouts over on this table. I want y'all to pick up after the talk, and it's got all kinds of stuff. It's kind of self-explanatory, but I think you'll find it really helpful, and it's a good thing to refer back to about what to say, what to do, and some other things that you might find helpful when you're dealing with people who are grieving. I think the main reason people don't know what to don't they just I think the main reason they say hurtful things, they don't mean to hurt. They mean to be helpful, and so often they mean to say the right things. And I think the reason that they foul up so badly is they don't know what to say, and so what do they say? They say what they heard other people who didn't know what to say heard somebody else say at a funeral, and so that gets passed on from generation to generation. But let's go through kind of the negatives first, and then the positives about things we might do that might be helpful to someone who's having a real rough time. The first thing of all is don't abandon them, don't avoid them. One of the greatest regrets I hear from the bereaved is how their circle of friends shrink after a loss of a loved one. We hear this a lot, particularly with children. And the reason is not because people don't want to help, but they don't know what to say, so they just stay away. And so loneliness makes grieving even worse. So whatever you do, don't leave them alone. Bereaved spouses often find their couples groups shrink because somehow they don't fit in with the group anymore. One, they're not a pair, and secondly, people somehow they just are not comfortable around people who are grieving, and these are usually social groups, and so they get kind of left by themselves too. Bereaved parents have similar experiences. Many friends and acquaintances don't know what to say, so they don't say anything. And even, one of them told me at a compassionate friends meeting, they act like death is contagious. I just can't get around it. So I got to stay away from it. Another thing is don't give unasked for advice. Everyone knows what a grieving person should do and shouldn't do. They should get counseling, or they shouldn't see a counselor. They should get out more. They ought to stay out of the public eye. They should go back to work. They should stay at home. They should socialize. They shouldn't. One of the ladies at one of our meetings, if you use it, she said, sometimes people just should all over me. And she's right. Everybody knows what you should do, even if they've never been there. They know. Many times, the griever, they don't even know what they want or what they need, and neither do you. If they should ask you for your advice, keep it simple and answer only the question that they ask. Don't elaborate. I think everybody wants to try to fix it, and it's not fixable. Males particularly, we like to fix things, and so be careful about trying to fix things. Be careful about theology. As my faith is important to me, but let them know that you're open to discussing things about belief or spiritual problems, but let them take the lead in instigating topics. Don't you try to do it for them. Often mourners, well, not often, almost always, they're going to ask you, well, why did this happen? And I had one lady, she came to me. I don't think I told you about this last week, but her husband died of a heart attack after a negative stress test. On the way back to the room, he dropped dead. And for the next year, she was in at least once or twice a month. And she always said, well, why did this happen? And she wasn't asking why. Why? And we knew why it happened. He had a 90% blockage of a main coronary artery. But this is the kind of a question, not a theologic question. It's just a hard question. You know, why did it happen? Where did this fit into the great scheme of things? And I asked that, but I only did it for like a week. And then I said, yeah, I'm not going to get an answer to this, so I quit asking it. But if they ask you why, the best thing to say is, you know, you don't know, so just say, I don't know. You can say it gently, but don't try to start explaining. You don't know. Sometimes grieving people get angry at God, really angry, and they're very vocal about it. Remember, God's big enough to take care of himself, and he doesn't need us to help take care of it. You start trying to defend God or to explain why, and then you're just getting into quicksand. It's better just to let it go. No matter what the circumstances are, someone is going to tell them it was God's will. And they did me, and not many, because they kind of knew how I felt about that. But the only thing I almost did this to one person, but I didn't. But someone said it was God's will. What are you going to say when they say, would you please explain to me how this was God's will? You seem to know so much about it. And so this is not a good time for theologic discussions. Be careful about quoting scripture. It may be absolutely true, but it's often misunderstood and counterproductive. This is usually done in those early few weeks after the loss, when we're really all bad off and people want so much to help us. The griever may be struggling spiritually, but they don't want any pat theologic answers. I'll give a personal example. This was a good friend of mine, came to me about a month after Brad's death. And he said, I found something I think will really help you. And so I said, okay. He opened his Bible and he turned to the account of the death of David's son. Who she had been my patient from the time not when she was in the newborn nursery, but almost. She had been my patient her whole life. And she had become a police officer here in Oak Ridge. And she came and she'd gotten permission from the police chief to park her car and sit in it in our driveway. And she told us that, you know, there'd been a spate of burglaries of houses being burglarized while they were at the visitation or while they were at their loved one's funeral. And so she came and sat in the driveway in her police car, and we weren't burgled the whole time. Several of Jean's friends walked with her 4 days a week for almost 4 months. They met her every day. They were really faithful in doing that. And I asked Jean one day, you know, well, what do we all talk about? She said, well, sometimes we don't even talk. They just met her and walked with her, and they were with her. These people demonstrate one thing I think you need to keep in mind when deciding, well, what should I do? And the pertinent thing is, don't ask. If you tell someone, if you need anything, just ask me, I guarantee you'll never get a phone call. If you see something that needs doing, if the leaves need raking, your lawn needs mowing, if the dog needs walking, if they need some grocery shopping done, do it. That is something that they will appreciate forever. And it seems so simple to us, but do it. And another important thing you can do is listen to them. Grieving persons need to talk. Remember we talked last week about you talk your way through grief? more than anything else. You need someone to talk to. And some people are just uncomfortable with that, especially when they hear the same thing over and over again. And they just keep repeating. But you remember I talked to you last week about Jacqueline Kennedy after Jack Kennedy was killed? They need to tell their stories, so let them talk. Let them take the lead. And if silence is okay. Everybody feel like we got to fill everything with chit chat, but if you're there and they have something they need to say, they'll say it, and let them take the lead in talking what you're going to talk about. Don't be concerned if they cry, even if they cry a lot. Don't try to shush them or anything like that. Crying can be therapeutic. I can remember the last time I cried before Brad died, and I was 9 years old. I just never cried. I remember the last time my dad was spanking me, and I knew if I cried, he'll quit. So I cried, and he quit. And I didn't cry. I don't recall crying any time ever after that until Brad died. And I know that women tend to cry a lot easier than men do, and I think we missed out on something, because there were times when it would just build up in me, and if I could have a good cry, I felt so much better. And so I would get off by myself. I would think of things Brad and I had done that were fun, and that would make me sad, and I would cry, and then I would feel better. But crying can be helpful. I remember one lady, patient of mine, whose daughter was killed in a car wreck, and she made an appointment with me at the office to come in and talk to me after her daughter had been killed in a car wreck. So as soon as I walked into the room, she burst into tears and started sobbing uncontrollably. And so I pulled up a chair and sat down, gave her a tissue, and then finally I gave her the whole box of tissues. And she cried for over half an hour straight. Then finally she cleaned herself up, got up, and left. Neither of us said a word the whole time she was there. Later, some of her friends, who were also my patients, told me how much she said I helped her. And I didn't say a word. So you don't have to shut them down, just let them cry. And I guarantee you they'll run out of tears sometime if you can sit it out. 6 to 8 weeks after the funeral is a really critical time with newly bereaved. The world's moved on. While they're still bogged down in grief. The reality of the situation crashes down about 6 to 8 weeks later, and things start going away. The family's all gone home. All the relatives have gone home. You don't get any more sympathy cards. You don't get any more notes. You don't get any more casseroles. You don't get. It's just everybody seems to have forgotten, and no replacements to any of these things are coming. I call it the dog days of grief. The dog days of grief are here. A personal note: an invitation to coffee for conversation, brownies, a casserole at this time can do more good than Prozac. After everybody has quit doing any of this, if you do any of them, it's really, really helpful. Notes, I think, are some of the best things you could possibly do when someone has lost someone. Write a note. My personal preference is for handwritten notes. I don't respond that well to emails and texts, it's better than nothing. But I like to get a handwritten note. Jean and I never threw away a note that said anything personal about Brad or me or Gene. We kept them for years. In fact, we still had them in a box somewhere in the house when our house burned down in Gatlinburg. This was years later. We didn't get them out and read over them and anything like that. It's just something that, but they do. Social media is great. I'm not real good at it. Some people are. But if you know how to convey your feelings with notes on Facebook, that's fine. But the important thing is that you convey it. You need to let them know and keep conveying it for a long time. One quickie doesn't take care of the situation. So what should you say in your notes? You're going to write, I'm going to be good, I'm going to write a note. What should you say? Always refer to the deceased by name, not as your husband, your child, your wife. Always refer to them by name. The personal stories, they love personal stories and anecdotes, funny or otherwise. So include those. And what do you say? If it's a funny story, I tell it. If it's something that they impressed me, that they impressed me with, and I admired them for, tell them that. Notes that how others felt about our loved ones is really important, and it sticks with us for a long time. So let them know. What it says is, it says, I care. That's the main thing that you're getting from all these notes, is just that I care about you. A lot of times survivors are in no condition to do grocery shopping and or prepare food. So the stereotypical casserole and brownies and those sort of things come in really handy. And particularly, well, what does it say? It says, I care, I want to help, and this is the best thing I know to do. After 2 to 3 weeks, the crowds have diminished, and the food's been eaten, but they still don't feel like fixing more food. So several weeks later, they will appreciate even a zucchini casserole. So it'll be welcome. There's kind of a special situation with the survival of an older sole surviving spouse. Their need sometimes for companionship is as much as their need for food. With the male, even more so, because his cooking skills may be limited to cold cereal, oatmeal, and scrambled eggs. One thing that survivors always appreciate are those brave souls who are willing to freely say your loved one's name and tell stories about them. Most folks are really hesitant to do this. It shows me that they really mattered. But they're afraid to say their name because we tear up. I do this. I just get choked up. Gene sometimes cries, and then they think I've committed the unpardonable sin. I made you remember. Their memories are never far from us. You're not making us remember. The thing that makes us tear up and makes us feel emotional is that you remembered. That's the main thing, is that somebody else remembered them. And I appreciate it so much that I'm going to cry about it. It's never too late to offer consolation. People, sometimes you just can't think of what to say, and all of a sudden it's been 2 or 3 months, and now you feel embarrassed to send a note or something this late. It's never too late. They're never going to send it back to you, I promise you. But but it's never too late to do that. Uh, I remember with things that we got later that were so helpful. I'll give you a couple of examples. And well, one of them, four of Brad's friends named their children Bradley. Now, you talk about something that's nice. That's nice. The one I remember most is Brad's best friend in college. Called Jean from the delivery room, and she answered the phone, and he broke into tears and told her that his wife had just had a daughter that they were naming Bradley Yvonne. And Jean said, I think Yvonne's a beautiful name. He said, so do we, but we're calling her Bradley. And they do. She's gone through 16 years of, how is she 16, 18, darling? 16 or 18 years of her life is Bradley. But that really made a difference to us. I was at a writing conference here in Oak Ridge 15 years after Brad was killed, and this lady came up to me that I didn't know and introduced herself, and she was Brad's English teacher. Brad I like to think I'm a writer. He was the writer. And but she had, one of the things she did with her classes, she told me about this, that she had as a lesson on public speaking, she had each class member give a talk to the class, teaching them something they didn't know. And so when Brad's time came, he went up there. He took a 15-pound rockfish and plops it on her desk and taught the class how to fillet a fish. And well, and that to me, that was like being reintroduced to him, because that is so much like him. And it's really interesting. This was several years before, and she still used that as an example of creativity. About 5 years ago, any of y'all remember Joe Gaddis? He's still here, isn't he? Well, 5 years ago, I forget what I was doing that day, but my phone rang, and out of the blue, Joe Gaddis could call me. And says, "Is this Dr. Dew?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, this is Joe Gaddis. I was Brad's football coach." I said, I remember you. He said, "Well," and what had happened was a bunch of Brad's teammates had gone on and become coaches too, and they were at a coaching conference. And he told me there was 6 or 7 of them, and said, we're at a coaching conference, and said, for the last 2 hours we've been sitting around telling Brad stories. Said he was an amazing person. We still remember him. I still get choked up when I think about that phone call. It didn't take much for him to do that, but it meant so much to me. And things like that you can do without being obtrusive. Food, personal notes, memories, stories, anything you can remember whenever they're received, even years later, are things that we want to know. This is not an exhaustive list. There are many things that you can do that will hearten these people. You just have to use your own imagination and think things up. What should you say? That's the big thing. I say people say the wrong things, and the best thing I told you is one thing I brought you on that table. I brought a handout, and it has an exhaustive list. The Compassionate Friends came up with this for our meetings of things people should do, shouldn't do, should say, shouldn't say, and it's a good quick reference. So y'all take one with you when you go, and if you know someone that might need it, take it to them too. But that's a good thing to do. Anything you can do that helps ease these people is a valuable service. want to close out with one thing, and that's where is God in grief? And Roy has cleared this for orthodoxy and no blasphemy, to be sure. Actually, as I worry about, it's like when preachers talk to doctors and talk about medical things, it's when doctors talk to preachers about theological things. But in those early days of grief and loss and mourning, when I was really hurting, where was God? Where has He been throughout the rest of my grief journey? Where does God fit into this? It just seems like somewhere He should. And what follows are mainly personal experiences that I had, some observations and conclusions that I drew. How do I know that God had anything to do with it at all? Well, I set up my own criteria. Anything that was just too good to be true, anything that happened was too much to be coincidental, or was just unexplainable, I attribute this to God. And you can judge for yourself. The first place I found God to be was in Holy Scripture. I never read my Bible as desperately as I did after Brad was killed. I had a New English Bible that I hadn't read much, and so it didn't have anything in it. And so I started first and read from cover to cover, underlined and read everything I thought that had anything to do with me. Wound up most of Job and most of the Psalms were underlined and read. They gave me no clear-cut answers, but I still got some comfort from them. Here was a record of people like Job or David who were crying and ranting and carrying on just like I was, and God stood by them. When I was not up to prolonged reading, I just couldn't read anymore, I read the underlined section, went back and reread those. In those early days of grief, it's really easy to slide into self-pity, to feel alone and abandoned by friends and acquaintances. And sometimes I was, but it's just a short step to include God among the abandoners. And that crossed my mind occasionally. And then one day as I was reading through, I was reading over in Hebrews, and he said, never will I, let me find it here, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And He never has. That's one thing that I found that just helped. And then when you lose your parents, you lose your past. When you lose your child, you lose your future. And I was having real problems because I saw no hope for any future that lay ahead of me after Brad was killed. It's amazing how much of your life, you don't realize how much you've tied up in your child, and now it's gone. And what do you do with that? And so I was really having trouble with that, and tucked over in Jeremiah, and I'm sure you've all read this, but I had not noticed it ever before, was this one little verse and said, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you. And then the pertinent words, plans to give you hope and a future. And that, from then on, I felt much better about that particular topic. I've had several scriptures the other one, the one that I pinned up above my computer screen was the one for I'm convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor demons, neither the present nor future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation can separate us from the love of God that is Christ Jesus our Lord. That I read that almost every day, and it was helpful. I found it became one of my touchstones every day as we went along. The second place God was in my prayers, and this is the strangest thing that ever happened to me, but I'm going to share it. Prayer has never been my strong point. I just have a hard time. I keep trying to find the right words. I don't do a good job of it. Um, but I was I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what to pray for, and didn't know how to pray for it. I wasn't angry with God. I was just frustrated. My whole life, I've been going to church, reading my Bible, and people have been telling me God will be with you in times of trouble and comfort you in times of need. You know, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Your rod and your staff will comfort me. Well, I didn't feel very accompanied, and I didn't feel very comforted. Um, but I remember two of my prayers particularly. Um, During this time of annoyance and floundering and frustration, it was easy for uncertainty and questions and doubts to grow. And I didn't doubt God that much as I doubted me. Uh, and one thing that troubled me most was I was afraid that the simplistic, uh, untested faith I'd lived my life by might be full of holes. Uh, I worried that some of the stuff I claimed to believe might not even be true, and maybe none of it was true. Uh, the thing, so I said this prayer quite a few times. Is I just prayed, I just give me one sign that anything that I believe is true, and it'll all hold together. And if I can get that one sign, it'll all hold together. That's not the prayer of a rock solid believer, but it was mine and it was honest. In truth, God was there all the time. I was just so caught up in grief and frustration and complaining so loudly, I neither heard nor recognized Him. That it was me. About 6 weeks after Brad was killed, I was taking care of Dad. They lived kind of down in our front yard, and he was in the last stages of ALS and paralyzed from the neck down. And my mom called me at the hospital late one night and said, Phil can't swallow. And we knew that was coming. And so I said, so we just don't do anything. I'll stop by on my way home. And so it was late at night as I came home from the hospital. I stopped by, and sure enough, he couldn't swallow. And as I walked out, Mom followed me and said, well, what's going to happen? And I was as gentle as I could, but I basically said, you know, he's over the next 2 to 4 weeks, he's going to dwindle away and die. He had told us no feeding tubes, no IVs. He wanted us just to leave him alone when he got where he couldn't swallow. And so I told her he's just going to dwindle away and die. And I didn't tell her any of the horrors of dehydration and wasting that lay ahead. So I said my second prayer when I got home that night, and I said, I know Dad is going to die, but don't let him hurt and let him go quick. And this is the strange thing. I mean, immediately, almost at that moment, the phone rang, and I answered. It was Mom, and she said, Phil just quit breathing. And all I could do is say, thank you. I don't need any more signs. Thank you. I take this really as undeserved grace. Despite my frustration and my doubts and my raving and ranting, God still answered my prayers for Dad and dispelled my misgivings and restored my faith. That was, as I said, that was one of the strangest things that has ever happened to me. A third place God is present in our grief is through others. If you read over in Hebrews, it says sometimes we meet angels unaware. We meet people who are angels and we don't even know it. And many people don't know what to do and what to say when somebody dies, and thus they don't do anything. Others do the best that they can, and their actions turn out to be angelic to me. Here are 2 or 3 things that happened to me that through others that I think came directly from God. Do any of y'all remember Jenny Rogers, Dr. Rogers' wife? She was a wonderful musician. We were not close friends. We were acquaintances. I knew her from singing in her Christmas thing. But she went and she wrote a beautiful song in Brad's memory. She hired a professional band, went to a professional recording studio and had it recorded, and sent me the tape. I received the tape 6 weeks after Brad's death. I received it on the day that I was to take Mom to the same funeral home to pick out a casket and to get all the things ready for the funeral that I had been to 6 weeks before for Brad. There's no way the timing of that tape coming that day could be coincidental. That there was some heavenly part of that one. I think I was born to be a family doctor. I love it, and my medical practice had been my life, and I loved it until Brad died. And after that, I had a real time relating to my patients the way I had before. I just couldn't get into it with them. And I struggled and fought with this and tried to decide what am I going to do for over a year. And then just totally out of the blue, the hospital CEO called me and said, we want to start a hospitalist program and we'd like for you to run it. And with it, I had much less stress, much less personal contact with patients like I needed to have in my family practice. And this proved really to me to be a God-given boost at a really difficult time in my life. And sometimes I think God acts through others and they don't even know it. Jean was having a hard time staying at our home. Oak Ridge is not a large town, and she was hesitant to get out and go into town and be seen and recognized as the murdered boy's mother. And she was spending a lot of days, she would go to Westtown and spend the day at Westtown, just kind of never bought anything, just to have something to do and not to meet people and have to talk about Brad. I prayed every day, please do something to help Jean. And any of y'all remember Dillard Minot? Dillard, if you remember, Dillard had a cabin up in the mountains that he had built, he and some guys from his previous church. And he had said when he retired, he moved to that cabin. He said, I'm going to die in this cabin. This is where I'm going to die. His 2 sons had staked claims to it, said, we want it when you die. And so that was the way it was. 3 years after Brad died, one evening, my phone rings and answers it. Richard, this is Dillard. Well, hey, Dillard, we had not had any contact with him for 3 years at this time. Said, this is Dillard. Said, would you be interested in buying my cabin? And I said, yes, I would. I didn't ask what he want for it or anything. I said, yes, I would. And this actually proved to be one of the main things in Jean's dealing with her grief. She started she would go up every Thursday afternoon to the mountains, to stay in the cabin, come back on Sunday night. Uh, she was away from everybody that she knew. She was away from me. She was away from the house where her memories were. And she had found this group, a hiking group up there. And she started hiking. We had never hiked before, really. And so she started hiking with them every week. And here she has some real social contact with a group of people who knew her only as Jean Dew, the lady from Oak Ridge, not Jean Dew, the murdered boy's mother. Why would my friend change his lifelong plans? And why would he think of us? And what about his sons? God knows. And literally, I have no idea why these things happened, but they did. And they were really, really important. Doug had told me there were some people who were coming here who had recent losses. I don't know if they are or not, but if any of you are here, I want to wish you a couple of things. Is Godspeed on your grief journeys. Cling to the memories of your loved one. Strive to bring some meaning to their life and yours, and hold on to your faith. And the parting thought I'd like to leave you with, we're told again in Hebrews, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we possess, for he who promised is faithful. And what has he promised those of us who mourn? He promised that that you will be comforted. God has plans to give you a hope and a future, but he's promised more than that. He said, God himself will be with them and will be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, mourning, or crying, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for the word is trustworthy and true. Amen, and thank you. Do y'all have any questions that you would just dying to ask?